I never thought I'd be saying this, but we are standing on the edge of what could be the biggest Second Amendment win in modern history. Not just some symbolic gesture, not a tiny rollback, but a real tangible strike against the decades-old laws that have punished law-abiding gun owners for far too long. For almost a century, we've lived under the weight of the National Firearms Act, an outdated set of rules built in the age of gangsters and bootleggers, now being used to target everyday Americans who just want to own a suppressor or shorten a rifle barrel without being treated like criminals. But that might finally change. Right now, buried inside a major Republican-led budget bill is the opportunity to gut the core of the NFA legally permanently. And in this video, I'm going to break it all down, what's in the bill, how it works, and why this moment matters more than ever. The truth is, most people today have no idea why the National Firearms Act even exists. It wasn't written with suppressors or SBRs in mind because of mass shootings or public safety concerns. It was a reaction to organized crime in the 1930s, a time when lawmakers were desperate to control violence tied to the mafia and Prohibition-era chaos. So they crafted a law that made certain firearms and accessories practically unreachable for ordinary citizens, not by banning them outright, but by burying them under paperwork delays and taxes. That law has never gone away. We're still paying a $200 tax for suppressors and short-barreled rifles, a fee that in today's money doesn't seem like much, but back then was designed to keep these tools out of reach for anyone who wasn't wealthy. Add to that the registration process, fingerprinting photos, government approval, and waiting 8, even 12 months, just to legally own something that's already legal. I've gone through it. Most of you watching probably have too, or you've avoided it completely, not because the equipment is dangerous, but because the process is insulting. Being treated like a threat, being forced to report every detail of your life for a suppressor, while criminals laugh and do whatever they want with zero paperwork. That's the problem. The NFA doesn't stop crime. It punishes the people who follow the law. And until now, there hasn't been a serious chance to change that. Until now. What makes this situation even more ridiculous is that we're not talking about some kind of full-auto machine gun here. We're talking about things like suppressors, which literally reduce noise and protect hearing, and SBRs, which are simply shorter rifles. They function almost identically to other rifles, yet they're wrapped in layers of red tape like they're nuclear weapons. And that infamous $200 tax stamp, it's still with us. Introduced in the 1930s, it was designed to be a financial wall, not to raise revenue, but to discourage ownership completely. Back then, $200 was like dropping several thousand today. It was a strategic move, make it so expensive and bureaucratic that regular Americans just wouldn't bother. And it worked. It still works. Even now, when $200 isn't life-ruining for most people, it's still an extra cost. And more importantly, it's a symbol, a reminder that your rights come with a fee, a price tag slapped on your freedom. Not only that, but every time you want to add a suppressor or an SBR, you're expected to register it, wait months, and send your personal data to a government that already doesn't trust you. This isn't about safety. It's about control. And for decades, they've gotten away with it because no one had the spine or the strategy to challenge the system where it counts in the budget. Now, for the first time in a long time, that might actually be changing. What's happening right now almost feels like it wasn't supposed to happen. This isn't a flashy 2A headline thrown out for votes. This is real legislative machinery quietly turning in our favor. Deep inside a budget reconciliation package, yes, a bill meant to deal with taxes and federal spending is language that could strip away the most painful parts of the NFA. That's because this isn't a standalone Second Amendment bill. It's part of a larger financial process, and that's what makes it so powerful. Reconciliation bills are immune to the filibuster in the Senate. They only need a simple majority, no supermajority, no endless debate, just 51 votes, and it's through. For once, the same system that's been used to sneak in bloated spending might actually work for our side. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The suppressor tax was the first domino. It was modest, just a removal of the $200 fee, but that opened the door. With pressure from gun rights groups and some surprisingly assertive voices in Congress, the scope expanded. Now, SBRs, SBSs, and even AOWs are all on the table. The irony is incredible. For decades, we've been told that removing these laws is impossible. But buried in a bill they probably didn't expect anyone to read carefully, the most sweeping rollback of the NFA in modern history is inching toward reality. This is where things get tricky, because even though the bill is moving through budget reconciliation, which means it can skip the filibuster, it still has to pass something called the Byrd Rule. And if you've never heard of that before, you're not alone. Most people haven't. The Byrd Rule is an internal Senate rule named after Senator Robert Byrd. It's designed to keep reconciliation bills focused strictly on budget-related matters. That means no policy changes, no moral arguments, no constitutional appeals, just numbers. If a provision doesn't directly impact federal spending or revenue, it can be stripped out. And that's where opponents are going to strike. They'll argue that removing the registry requirement for suppressors or SBRs isn't a financial matter, it's policy. They'll try to separate the tax elimination from the infrastructure that enforces it. But here's the flaw in their argument maintaining that infrastructure costs real money. In fact, the ATF requested millions just to upgrade the NFA registry a couple of years ago. If the tax goes away and millions in revenue disappear, then what's the justification for maintaining a system built to track something that no longer brings in income? That's the angle. That's how this passes Byrd scrutiny, not with emotion, but with math. Let's get something straight right now. Suppressors are not silencers. They don't turn your rifle into some whisper-quiet assassin's tool. What they actually do is reduce the decibel level to something that won't destroy your hearing after a few rounds at the range. That's it. That's what they're for. And yet owning one in this country still means fingerprinting paperwork, a $200 tax, and months of waiting. It's insane. In countries like Finland or New Zealand, suppressors are sold over the counter to protect hearing and reduce noise pollution in rural areas. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., the supposed home of gun rights, we treat them like contraband. The narrative around suppressors has been twisted by Hollywood and anti-gun politicians who know better but push the fear anyway. They rely on the public not understanding what a suppressor really does. The truth is, most people who own suppressors are range shooters, hunters, and folks who just don't want to destroy their ears every weekend. These aren't criminals, and they're not sneaking around at night. But the law treats them like they're doing something wrong just for wanting a safer, more responsible shooting experience. They don't want you to understand that. Because the moment people realize that suppressors are safety tools, not stealth weapons, the whole foundation for regulating them collapses. And that's exactly what's happening now. Short-barreled rifles, SBRs, have been demonized for decades. The idea was that because they're more compact, they're somehow more dangerous, easier to conceal, easier to misuse. That's been the justification for forcing millions of gun owners through mountains of paperwork and regulation just to shave a few inches off a barrel. But here's the thing. I've held rifles that are 16 inches long and legal right next to SBRs that are 14 inches and considered regulated. The difference in size is meaningless in the real world. Performance-wise, these rifles function the same. In fact, with the popularity of pistol braces and bullpup designs, you can legally own firearms that are shorter and more compact than most SBRs with no stamp, no weight, no registry. None of this has ever been about public safety. It's about appearances. It's about lawmakers seeing a shorter barrel and assuming intent. But criminals aren't lining up to register their SBRs. They're not filing tax stamps or waiting 6 months for ATF approval. They're using whatever they can get their hands on, legal or not. Meanwhile, regular people who want to build a more ergonomic, compact home defense setup are forced to jump through hoops or risk being labeled a felon. That's absurd. The law makes compliance harder than defiance. It's time that distinction ends because the function of a firearm doesn't change with 2 inches of steel. But the consequences for the owner sure do. There's a quiet machine running behind all this, the registry. It doesn't get headlines, it's not flashy. But it's where the control lives. Every suppressor, SBR, SBS, and AOW you register ends up in a federal database monitored, maintained, and upgraded using your tax dollars. That's not just bureaucracy, it's surveillance disguised as bookkeeping. Most people don't realize how much money goes into keeping that machine running. In 2022 alone, the ATF requested an additional $4.5 million just to modernize the NFA database. That's not enforcement. That's infrastructure digital walls, not physical ones built to keep lawful owners under constant watch. The more items added each year, and it's tens of thousands, the more money is poured into maintaining the system. And with the $200 tax stamp potentially being eliminated, the justification for keeping this registry begins to fall apart. No revenue, no cost recovery, just an expensive system of suspicion aimed at people who've done nothing wrong. This isn't just a matter of principle, it's math. If the tax disappears and the registry remains, what you're left with is a bloated surveillance program with no financial purpose. That's what has to be dismantled next. Not just the tax, but the entire tracking system that was built to make law-abiding gun owners feel like criminals. There's a lot of talk in Washington about protecting the Second Amendment. You hear it every election cycle. It shows up in speeches, campaign ads, and fundraising emails. But talk is cheap. What matters is what happens when there's an actual chance to move the needle. This bill buried in the reconciliation process is that chance. It doesn't rely on public opinion polls or courtroom battles. It doesn't need 60 votes in the Senate. It just needs a handful of Republicans to follow through on what they've been promising for years. And that's the real test. Because if they let this opportunity pass, if they cave to pressure or stay silent out of fear of political optics, then it's clear they were never serious about gun rights to begin with. The truth is, most of the groundwork has already been done. The financial logic checks out. The pathway through reconciliation is open. What's left is the will to act. Some members of Congress have stepped up. Others are still watching the wind. This isn't the time for watching. This is the time for pushing hard. Because wins like this don't come around often. And if they hesitate now, they'll show us exactly where they stand, not with their words, but with their silence. Momentum like this doesn't come often. When a door opens even slightly, it has to be pushed with everything we've got. Not with slogans, but with attention, pressure, and follow-through. This is where staying informed matters. This is where voices matter. Spread the word, contact your reps, and stay loud, not angry, just present. That's how pressure becomes policy. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you. These issues deserve more than headlines, they deserve understanding. Let's share and leave your take in the comments. That's how we move forward together. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay sharp, stay focused, and I'll see you in the next one.